I'm going to put that over here.
This doesn't show back here.
Oh, okay.
This doesn't show. So when you want something, when you want.
Oh, I like it up closer. I might just end up sitting on it if I get tired.
When you want, you can if you want to.
Yeah.
And then just reach behind.
Okay.
Got it.
I say something? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Test 1, 2, 3. It's on. Welcome to Grace Christian Family Center. This is God in My Journey, and tonight's story is Doug Metcalfe.
Good evening to all of you. My name is Doug, and I am so glad that my wife Karen and I found this great church here, and especially our pastor. We were afraid that we would not be able to find a church that had a pastor as good as the one we left in California last year, but I was proven wrong. This pastor and I hit it right off, as we have at least a couple of things in common. First is the fact that I am a retired associate pastor from a church in California, and second, we both enjoy golf. My best friend Roger and I used to tee off around 6:30 or 7 o'clock at our local public golf course on any given weekday. Not so much as we just couldn't wait to play, but to admire and stand in awe at God's handiwork, what with the tall trees and the birds chirping, as well as the green grass all covered with dew. Any golf course that early in the morning before anyone gets to tear it up is beautiful. It's God's handiwork. Before I jump into my topic for this evening, let me say that while I have done a few sermons and led many Bible studies, this was by far the hardest topic I have ever had to prepare for. Whereas the sermons and the Bible study classes were subjects taken from the Bible, this is about me and my journey with God. You have no idea how many countless hours I spent at my desk since I was asked if I would be willing to talk about my life journey and how and when God intervened. My wife Karen can ascertain how long I spent on this thing. So then, what I am about to share with you is my testimony, or better yet, God's testimony for me, the story of my life. It's been hard to think about and then try and write down all that I have gone through in my life. And I actually became very depressed almost every time I worked on this. I'm sure it will be even harder to talk about it tonight. But I know that God will be with me as I give you the good and bad of my life story. Today, I am just a normal 80-year-old retired person you might see any day of the week at one of the local grocery stores or at Lowe's or anywhere around town. But up until about 13 years ago, I was a totally different person, a functional alcoholic, drinking 2 to 3 half-gallon bottles of scotch per week with no mixer, just straight. Of course, I didn't start out drinking that much. It just eventually got to that point. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, we had 4 young ladies from Teen Challenge speak to us about how they were able to turn their lives around after finding God, and through Him, they were able to start casting out the devil and to begin leading a Christian life. Those 4 women are going through what I went through almost 20 years ago. Alcohol has been with us for a very long time. It was first mentioned in the Bible after Noah landed on dry land when the flood ceased. He planted a vineyard and then drank the wine he made and became inebriated. That's from Genesis 10, verse 21. Studies show that adults, 85% of them report drinking alcohol at some point in their life. That's an awful high number. So how did I become an alcoholic? Why did I feel the need to consume that much alcohol daily? At the time, I had no idea what alcohol could do to your body. But let me give you a few examples of what it actually can do. Typically, alcohol is a waste product that the body tries to excrete. If you drink more than the body can process, you begin to feel intoxicated as the alcohol builds up in the bloodstream and then is distributed through the body. It affects the immune system, the skeletal system, and the reproductive system, which can cause ED in men and infertility in women. Without going into detail, it also affects the circulatory system, the digestive system, and the central nervous system. But most of all, it affects the brain. Alcohol reaches your brain in only 5 minutes and starts to affect you within 10. A blood alcohol level of 0.08, which is the legal limit for driving, takes about 5.5 hours to leave your system. So you can still be inebriated for up to 5 hours even after you stop drinking. We have all seen too many instances of accidents involving drunk drivers, and some of them had quit, as I say, up to 5 hours before. For those of you with children, please drum into them what you can as what I'm talking about now and as we go on further. If I didn't have God on my side today, as you will see, I probably would not be here today with you. Let me list the 7 most common causes of alcoholism, most of which I have part of. One is family history. That's the biggest one. This plays a large part in what causes alcoholism. If you have relatives that are inebriated or drink too much, the biological and genetic factor comes into play very, very quickly. However, environment also will play a large part. Second is starting to drink at a young age. You are likely to develop a dependence on alcohol if you are under the age of 15 and start drinking. There are also mental health disorders, which basically states if you feel different from others, you can turn to alcohol to alleviate that feeling that others are judging you or laughing at you. 4 is stressful environments. Stress at work or home can drive one to drink. I'm sure we've all had stress in either of those situations. 5th is peer pressure. Others telling you, come on, drink with me, come on. 6 is trauma. Childhood abuse or sexual abuse are high risk factors for alcoholism. Yeah, the page won't turn. There we go. And 7 is the lack of family supervision. If no one watches what you're doing or asks what you are doing, you're apt to take things that you know you shouldn't. So how does one become an addict to anything, be it alcohol, drugs, gambling, porn, even sugar? Does one just wake up one morning and say, I think I want to be an alcoholic? Do we then take classes on how to be a good alcoholic? Do we brag to our friends how much we can drink, smoke, inject, or bet each day? I don't think so. You probably already know what addiction is, so I won't go into that. But I'm sure most of you have seen addicts sleeping under bridges or even on a sidewalk. Do you think this is where they want to be? Are they happy? Again, I don't think so. Most of the time, they just drink to try and forget where they are in their life. They are the unlucky ones. There are many more who live in fancy homes, wear expensive clothes, have 6 or 7 figure incomes, are celebrities or sports figures. Let me mention a few that are no longer with us, due in some part to alcoholism. W.C. Fields, the actor, Truman Capote, the author, Billie Holiday and Hank Williams, singers, as well as many others that I won't go into. But how about Mickey Mantle, the famous baseball player for the New York Yankees? He died at age 64 from cirrhosis of the liver caused by excessive alcohol consumption. He even had a drink named after him called the Breakfast of Champions. 2 shots of brandy with some Kahlua and cream mixed in a blender. He did that almost every morning he was alive. How about Robin Williams? He committed suicide in 2014 at the age of 63. He won high acclaims for his roles in pictures like Mrs. Doubtfire, Jumanji, Good Morning Vietnam, or I should say, Good Morning Vietnam. As well as the TV program Mork and Mindy. He won an Oscar for one of them. He started out as a mime in San Francisco, and I was able to see him once, not knowing where he was going or who he was. But he became a successful actor from starting out as a mime. He was a person that could play a role unlike himself. Instead of being Robin Williams, he was somebody else. He fought depression and low self-esteem all his life. But by playing someone else, these negative attributes vanished. That's what alcohol can do to you. They help you to become someone else because you don't like who you are. But what about me? How did I get addicted to alcohol? What things in my life took me down this path? Recent studies show that you have one parent who is an alcoholic. You have a 25% chance of being one also. If you have both parents, it becomes 50%. And if you have 2 parents and 1 grandparent, 75% chance you will become an alcoholic as well. But you didn't have to be that. You don't have to. I didn't have to. I had a choice. God left it up to me as to what path I wanted to follow. Drink or don't drink. Drink being a terrible way to live. Don't drink being sober, a better way to live. Let me read something called The Tale of Two Wolves. I find this very interesting. One evening, an old Cherokee told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside people. He said, "My son, the battle is between 2 wolves inside us all. One is evil. It is anger, envy, jealousy, sorrow, regret, greed, self-pity, guilt, resentment, lies, superiority, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, humility, kindness, empathy, generosity, forgiveness, truth, compassion, and faith." The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, "Well, which wolf wins?" And the old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." My experience with alcoholism was through my grandfather, Alexander, or Buzz, as we used to call him. He lived with our family in San Francisco, along with my father, my mother, and my brother Richard, who was 6 years older than me. My dad built a small room in our basement for Buzz to live in, who had retired as an engineer on the Southern Pacific Railroad. Whenever Buzz got his retirement check or pension, he went bar hopping. My dad would have to go out late on those nights to find him and bring him home before he spent all his money on booze or gave it to someone. I was told not to go downstairs during the day to visit Buzz, as Mom and Dad did not know what condition I might find him in. He drank all the time. I must have been around 5 or 6, and it never bothered me to sneak down to this room where Buzz would read me stories, and he was always nice to me. Both my parents were alcoholics as well. Dad usually kept a bottle of vodka under his driver's seat, as well as other bottles in the kitchen and in his bedroom. I remember Dad's drinking habits from the time I was very young, even before I started school. Problem was, my dad was a mean drunk. We learned not to bother him, at least not until after dinner. Dinner was a family affair, but did not include Grandpa Buzz. Mom would bring dinner down to him after we finished eating, as I guess they didn't know what kind of shape he would be in. He died when I was about 8, that is Buzz, and I didn't know until much later that it was from cirrhosis of the liver, which was caused by acute alcoholism. I think I had my first drink of alcohol around that age, probably 8 years old. When Dad didn't finish a drink, sometimes I would go and have a sip of it. I liked the way it tasted, vodka and 7-Up, and I soon began to like the way it made me feel, sort of goofy. Up until Buzz's death, I don't remember taking vacations, as I guess Dad didn't want to leave Buzz alone, but he didn't want to take him with us either. After Buzz died, however, we began to go on vacations, usually for a week or so during the summer. I called them vacations because that's what they were for Dad and Richard, but not so much for Mom and me, as they revolved around fishing and sleeping in tents far from civilization. We usually went to one of 3 places: Trinity National Forest, way up high in Northern California, Mount Lassen, also in Northern California, and Klamath Falls, Oregon. I vividly remember the first time Dad invited me to go fishing with Richard and him. I was so excited. We walked for what seemed like miles over rocks and fallen trees until we got to the area that Dad said was a good place to fish. However, there was a problem. Dad never taught me how to fish. Anyway, he got me all set up, showed me a few times how to cast, and then went over to where he was going to fish, leaving me alone. As if I was going to learn how to fish in one 5-minute lesson? Ha ha. The first time I tried to cast my line, it went backwards and got snagged in a tree. Dad came and rescued it. The next got under a rock, and the third got all tangled up in the reel. That was it for Dad. He couldn't cast even once, as he always had to come and help me. After the 3rd time of helping me, he blew his cork and started yelling using choice words and told me to go back to camp. He said I would never be a fisherman, and he was sorry that he asked me to join he and Richard. He took my rod and yelled for me to get out. You can't imagine how degraded I felt. I wasn't good for anything. I was used to being teased and taunted by my classmates and being called Four Eyes because I wore glasses all the time. But to be degraded by my dad and being told I was worthless really brought me down and seriously affected my self-worth, and probably did a lot to change my personality. That was probably the worst day of my life. And from then on, I stayed with Mom at the campsite when we went on vacations. I should mention here the fact that I never took my boys fishing because of that incident. Mom really took over being both the mother and father to me, as my dad had very little time for me. Brother Richard was very athletic, and Dad was very proud of him. It didn't hurt either that Richard took a quick interest into fishing and duck hunting. Dad and he spent a lot of their free time duck hunting on weekends and fishing whenever they could. After my sister was born in 1951, she became the apple of Dad's eye, and he would do anything for her. So that left Mom and me as Richard was moving out and getting his own apartment. There was never any real bonding between my father and me. He became like an absentee dad, physically in the house, but that was all. He gave of material things, but not of himself. Dinner was a family affair and was usually a quiet yet fearful occasion. Sometimes Dad would get angry, and if the dinner wasn't right, and I recall more than once, he would throw the plate full of food and storm out of the dining room. It was not uncommon for Richard or me, mostly me, to get a backhand if we said something wrong that upset him. Dad was also the punisher in the family, as you can imagine. You have probably heard the expression, "Wait till your father gets home." That was often something I did not want to hear, but heard very often. I was the troublemaker in the family, and I paid the price for it. I would forget to come home after school and instead go play with my friends. I would forget to do my chores. I would forget to do my homework, but would tell Mom that I did it. I would forget to tell my mom where I was going after coming home from school and changing. And sometimes I got home a little after dark, and then I knew what was coming. That's when my mom would utter that terrible expression, "Wait till your dad gets home," or if it was too late, it is, "Dad is in the basement waiting for you." I just hoped that my dad was sober. When I went down to the basement to get my punishment, it was always with a bolt on my bare butt, and the number of hits depended on how drunk he was. Can you imagine doing that to a child today? Times have changed. Quite often, Mom would come down and yell, "That is enough," and make him stop. Richard, being 6 years older than me, was smart enough not to do or say anything to upset Dad. I didn't know how much my mom drank until I was in my 50s and by accident found her hiding place. My sister knew about it, but never told my brother or me. I guess Mom started putting vodka in her coffee in the morning and continued that throughout the day. She was a closet drinker, but she always acted as though she had never been drinking. I never thought she had. Mom was a strict Catholic, and while in San Francisco, my brother and I had to dress up and go to Sunday Mass with her. She even enrolled me into a Catholic school where I thought I was learning all the right stuff about God and Jesus. Anyway, after I came home too many times with bruised knuckles, my mom enrolled me into a public school that was close enough that I could ride my bike to school. That was back in the 40s and early 50s, when mothers didn't worry about many of the same things that mothers worry about today. San Francisco was a great place to live for a kid back then. You could ride your bike almost anywhere, to the San Francisco Zoo or the beach, as we only lived within a mile of those two. Then there was Golden Gate Park, which was only 2 miles away, with so many places to see that one could spend all day there. Add to that public transportation, which could take you just about anywhere you wanted to go in the city. There were streetcars, buses, and cable cars that were free to those of us that had a school pass. We also had a few parks close by, where there was usually a baseball game going on and you could watch or join in. I bring this up only to show why I got into so much trouble so many times for not coming home right after school. I'm sure a lot of you mothers are cringing right now, the thought of a young child going out alone or with a few friends all over San Francisco without an adult. It's too bad that San Francisco has turned into a city you don't even want to visit, let alone live in anymore. I also remember bringing home notes from my teachers regarding my bad behavior, ones that had to be signed by Mom or Dad. Sometimes I hid these from my parents because of the beating I knew I would get. But you know, as I got older, I began to realize that sometimes the negative attention with the belt was better than no attention at all. My next encounter with drinking was probably the major one. Just prior to starting high school, I was informed that we were moving. God forbid, we were moving across the Golden Gate Bridge to a place called San Rafael in a place in San Rafael in Marin County. To me, it was a million miles away. I threatened to run away and did everything in my power to stay in San Francisco. But in 1956, we moved, and I got to start my sophomore year in high school in a new school not knowing anyone. And no one came up to me to say hi or anything. I was like the invisible man. To make matters worse, there was only one grammar school, one junior high, and one high school in the area. So all the students know each other, and they had formed their own cliques years before. Thankfully, in my junior year, two boys transferred in as well, Mike B and Mike M, and we all hit it off. We all hit it right off. Mike M came from a very wealthy family. Their home overlooked the San Francisco Bay and featured a huge pool with a cabana area and separate living quarters near the pool where Mike lived. We hung out at his house quite often, and I made good use of the bar in the main house, which I didn't know was off limits. It wasn't until about 20 years later that Mike told me that his dad knew I was drinking his liquor and did not want me around when he was home. Even then, I still didn't realize that I was becoming an alcoholic. The devil had me hooked. Let me read an article I found while working on this paper. If I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I would want to engulf the whole world in darkness. I would set out, however necessary, to take over the United States. I would subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. Did you hear about? Do as you please. I would teach people that bad is good and start a new prayer that goes like this: Our Father, which art in Washington. I would threaten TV with dirty movies and talk shows. I'd peddle narcotics to children like it was candy. I would have churches at war with one another, as well as nations against nations. I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let them run wild. I would have sniffing dogs at every school and metal detectors at every door. Soon, I could evict God from the schoolhouse, from the courthouse, and finally, Congress. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls. If I were the devil, I would take from the rich and give to the wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep doing what I'm doing now. That was written by a Mr. Paul Harvey back in 1965. Sound familiar today? The devil is at work. While I was an introvert, I soon found out that alcohol released my inhibitions. I was no longer shy, and when Mike started throwing parties at his house, I was able to ask girls to dance, which I was never able to do when we were sober. I became a new person. I was no longer a wallflower as long as I drank. Now often, if I asked a girl out, most would say yes. Of course, I had to grab a small drink or two from Dad's liquor cabinet before I picked her up. But things like that only happened on weekends. During the week, I was still the shy, introverted guy that no one noticed. One morning before taking a test that I didn't study for, I took a sip of Dad's vodka mixed with orange juice and then went to school. And I noticed the difference in me and started doing that as often as I could. I was taking college prep classes and doing quite well when I wasn't drinking. But once I started my morning pick-me-up, I began acting out of class, and I became the class clown so that I would get noticed. I really liked that. However, my grades plummeted and I almost didn't graduate. But when I look back, I realized that at least two things happened to me back then. First, my whole personality began to change. Instead of hiding from others because I had no feeling of self-worth, I began to feel as though everything had to be for and about me. Hey, everybody, look at me. Second, for the above to work, I had to have alcohol. They had to work together. My wife still reminds me today that most things are for and about me. At least that's the way I think. I enrolled in junior college but quit after one semester. I decided to get a job so I could make some money. However, after 2 years, I realized that I needed to have a college degree if I wanted to succeed anywhere in the business world. I applied to a few colleges and was accepted to San Jose State, which, although I did not know it back then, was voted one of the top 5 party schools in the nation. God forbid. I pledged a fraternity, was accepted, and moved into one of the 3 adjoining houses the fraternity rented. I found soon that having a beer while studying had a calming effect on me, and it seemed that I was able to return much of what I was reading. At least that's what I thought. For that, I soon earned the nickname of Doug Drunk, which at the time and for many years after I was very proud of. I also remember that the fraternity entered a contest at one point in time put on by Lucky Logger Brewing. We got a cash reward, and for 1 year or 1 semester, we got to keep as a mascot a well-trained St. Bernard, aptly named Lucky. Being a dog lover, I quickly said that I would take care of Lucky. I fed him, played with him, and let him sleep in my room for what was left of the spring semester. I sure got noticed when I walked him past most of the sororities. However, I forgot about summer break. I asked my mom if I could bring the fraternity mascot home for the summer, but neglected to tell her that it was a St. Bernard. I wish I had a picture of my mom's face when Lucky came bounding out of my car towards her. My drinking increased while at the fraternity, as we always celebrated TGIF with a keg or 2 of beer, and then we would have a co-ed party on Saturday nights, along with my drinking while studying during the week. By then, I had ignored God completely, but he was still there for me whether I knew it or not. He had plans for me. I didn't have to work all my way through college as my parents took care of all the expenses. All I had to do was call if I needed more money. My college years were around the time of the Timothy Leary area of turn on, tune in, and drop out, as well as the hippie movement, the beginning of free love, and of course, drugs. By the time I graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology, I had tried them all, some with not too pleasant experiences, but I left them all behind except alcohol. I soon found out that there were very few openings for a job that were able for me to take, so I ended up taking a job as an assistant traffic manager working for a large company in Oakland, California. However, within a month, my boss, the traffic manager, was fired due to being drunk at work too many times. So I had to learn to be a traffic manager by the seat of my pants. Anyway, moving on, I remember one harrowing experience on Christmas Eve. It was a family tradition to drive to my uncle's house about 40 miles from where we lived for a Christmas Eve get-together. My dad, mom, sister, and I all went. Dad drove there, but was too inebriated to drive home, so that left me. They didn't know how much I drank at the party. Anyway, while driving home, someone cut in front of me and caused me to slam on my brakes, almost causing an accident. All of a sudden, I had road rage. I still have a problem with that, but I am trying to calm my temper down, even if my wife doesn't agree. Anyway, I proceeded to play bumper tag with him in heavy traffic by speeding up in our big Oldsmobile and ramming his bumper. I would then slow down and then speed up again and ram his bumper. He soon got the message and pulled off at the next exit. However, everybody in our car was livid and yelling at me during all of this, but I paid no attention to them. You know, we all could have died that night because of me, but we didn't, because God was in the passenger seat. I should have known that God had plans for me and wasn't going to let me die. As much as I hate to admit it now, if you saw me driving any night from 1959 through 2005, I was probably somewhat drunk. Continuing, in 1965, I went down to our local Ford agency to look at cars, as my other car was getting old. I saw a brand new red 1965 Mustang GT convertible V8 with black leather seats and a white top that I fell in love with. I asked my dad if he would co-sign, which he did reluctantly, as he thought $2,800 was too much money to pay for such a car. By the way, that car is still in our family, as I gave it to my son for his college graduation after I had it restored. That car is now worth over $50,000. Now to 1966, still living at home. I was invited to a party thrown by my brother's ex-wife, and while there I saw a very beautiful woman, and after a few drinks went over to talk to her. I found out that she was married but was in the process of getting a divorce. We went out a few times and soon moved in together in a small apartment. It wasn't too many months later that I was surprised. She told me she was pregnant. She told me she was pregnant. I asked her to marry me because that was the thing to do, but she said no. Our son was born in 1967, and then she agreed to be my wife. Soon after, our landlord asked us to move out as our son's crying was keeping some of the other tenants awake. My parents then gave us enough money for a down payment to buy a home. We were able to buy the tri-level 2,300 square foot model home in a new subdivision, which included all the upgrades offered as well as all of the furniture in the home. We really lucked out. There were two distinct episodes that should have tipped me off that my drinking was really getting out of hand. The first I called the potion episode. As I recall, our son was about 4 or 5, and one day while my wife and I were pouring concrete for a patio, he wanted attention and was not getting any. We told him to go play in the house. It was about noon or so, and I had already started drinking beer. At some point, my wife noticed that our son was being very quiet and asked me to please go check on him. As I went in, I saw that a chair had been pulled up to my pool table and that he had gotten up on the pool table and peed all over it. I was mad. He knew better. I next went into the kitchen when I saw that he had made a potion, as he later called it, by mixing various liquids he found with dry foods and cleaning supplies to make a potion on the floor. What a mess. Coming out of the kitchen, I noticed bright crayon wall lines on the walls going up to the bedrooms. I went upstairs and found him coloring the walls of his bedroom. I was livid. I grabbed him, pulled down his pants, and began to spank his butt. My wife came up as she had heard him wailing and stopped me. Thankfully, I only spanked his bottom, but it left welts lasted for almost a week. If that had happened today, I would be in jail. The second episode that highlighted my drinking problem was on Halloween, which year I don't remember. Our second son was born in 1969, so it probably was 1973 or 4. My wife asked me to take the boys trick-or-treating around our neighborhood while she would stay at home and pass out candy. As usual, I was probably half drunk when I took the boys out in their costumes to trick-or-treat. A couple of the houses we went to not only had candy for the kids, but a shot of whiskey for the dads if they wanted it. I never heard of such a thing. The boys were having a great time, their bags almost full of candy. We came to one house that was totally done up on the outside, but the garage door was open and no light on. As we entered the garage, along with quite a few others, the lights came on and people in scary costumes came running out from hiding places. Everybody started running. When I turned around, the boys were gone. I found our oldest down on the sidewalk shivering. He was really scared. But there was no sign of our youngest. I searched up and down the block but did not find him. I yelled and called for him, but no answer. After about 20 minutes of looking, I went home with our oldest in tow and had to tell my wife that I had lost our youngest son. All hell broke loose. She quickly left to find him, but came back soon alone. She was about to call the police when the doorbell rang. I thought it was late trick-or-treaters, but instead of kids, there stood a woman with our son in her arms. She said she saw him crying in the street, and she was able to coax him into her house, and gave him candy and stuff to calm him down until he was finally able to give her his address. I can't believe that happened, and I blame all the fault on me and my drinking. My wife did too. Soon after celebrating my 10-year anniversary with the company I went to work for, I did a stupid thing, a very stupid thing. I saw a way to save our company money on transportation costs and increase my income, as well by opening a trucking company of my own with a couple of others that between us we could reduce our transportation costs by at least 10%. Great idea, and it was working, both saving the company money and putting extra money in my pocket. Somehow, word got back to my boss, and I was fired on the spot due to a conflict of interest which I was not aware of. I had to go home that day and tell my wife that I had gotten fired and no longer had a job. So I went home and drank before she got home, and then I told her. Thankfully, my parents took care of the car and house payments until I could get on my feet. From 1975 to 1979, I got into real estate, and it was very good to me. I bought us each a new car, spent money like we didn't have a worry in the world, and then in 1978, I was named Real Estate Salesperson of the Year for our area, which encompassed about 100,000 people. It just happened, however, that the office I worked at had a bar right next door. Mercy me. I started a routine where I would get to the office at 9, go over all that I had to do that day, make some phone calls to set up appointments, confirm those with my clients, go to lunch at the bar next door, drink until 3 or so, and get ready to pick up my clients. Yes, you heard me right. Drink and then go pick up clients. Little did I know that God was riding shotgun with me. The bar let me run a tab, which amounted to about $100 to $150 a month. My marriage was failing, but I chose to ignore it by drinking more. Then in 1980, the market fell apart. Interest rates got as high as 19%, and people couldn't afford to buy. Pretty soon, our savings were almost down to nothing, and our cars got repossessed. Our marriage wasn't getting any better either. I was drinking every day. I was, however, able to stay involved with my boys' activities. I became a Little League baseball coach and then a senior coach, while both my boys played baseball. My youngest son got interested in drama and was usually the male lead for most of his high school plays and received high accolades in our local paper. This led him to University of California at Santa Barbara, where he majored in drama, and then on now to being the drama teacher in Northern California. In 1982, I was given the opportunity to open up an office for a truck brokerage company. I accepted and soon was making enough money from commissions to keep our house and buy a couple of used cars. In 1984, I was offered the chance to buy the satellite office for a very nominal fee as the owner was going to retire. I knew that God wanted me to do this. I brought in 3 partners, experts in various aspects of the trucking industry, which turned out to be one of the worst mistakes I ever made. Thank God I still sold real estate on the side. Soon I was able to buy out the other partners, each of whom I felt was not contributing their fair share. I was now the sole owner of a multi-million-dollar in sales company. But I put a well-stocked bar in my semi-private office and was able to entice new customers to let us handle their shipments of the products we handled. You can probably what those products were: beer, wine, and spirits. Most of our customers were the cruise lines sailing out of Seattle, Galveston, and all the ports in Florida. As our 25th wedding anniversary was coming up, I decided to surprise my wife with a cruise to Hawaii. When I got home that evening, I said I had something for her. She said she had something for me also. I told her to go first, and she surprised me by telling me that she had filed for divorce. We didn't go to Hawaii, needless to say. The divorce turned out to be very messy and costly. In fact, enough to force my company, then a corporation, into bankruptcy. In 1994, I soon met my wife, Karen. We dated for about 6 months until one day she asked me what my intentions were, as she was more interested in a relationship, not just a dating thing. I agreed and soon asked her to marry me, and she said yes. We were married in 1995, and here I was with a new wife and what I hoped to be a glorious career in real estate. I worked out of my house. However, just like when I worked for my first real estate company, I had a bar very close to me, just down the hall in the kitchen. Karen didn't know how much I drank until much later in our marriage. I just lied about how much I drank. And it seemed that most of the people I knew were oblivious of the fact that I was drunk most of the time. I hid bottles all over the place and lied about that also. That brings up another problem that I hate, but I still have, but I'm doing better. Lying. I'm working hard to alleviate it. I lie about almost anything and have since I was a little boy. I have a mask on most of the time, but it is going away little by little. Karen has shown me what love really is and what a marriage should be, and all I showed her was deception and lies. Now I realize that Karen was a gift from God, but I didn't realize it until recently. Back when I was drinking and was confronted about my drinking problem, I would say, I don't have a drinking problem. I'm just a social drinker. But as time went on, Karen knew that I had a problem, a big one. We took a cruise back in 2003, and there my drinking problem really caught up with me. My bar bill was about half of what the cruise cost was for one of us, or about $900. Karen was irate, and I didn't know what to do. I drank more, but I don't know why. I became withdrawn, depressed, and it got to the point that we didn't go to family functions, as Karen was afraid I would embarrass her. I soon started drinking at 10 a.m. after she went to work and stopped around 2 so that I would be fine when she got home. My mom died in 2003, and I took that very hard. She was very important in my life. I can't begin to count the number of times I called her for advice, especially during my first marriage. She was my rock. After my mom died, I became an accident waiting to happen. In 2004, I fell off a fence while showing property to a client from the Bay Area. I had been drinking, and I thought I wouldn't fall. Wrong. Well, I did, fracturing my foot and pancaking my heel. Things were getting worse. I was angry, depressed, aloof, unhappy, and drunk. But I had no problem. One weekend in October, I went to a college fraternity reunion. When I got home, Karen's car wasn't in the driveway, but I figured she went to the store. It wasn't until I got inside the house that I had the feeling that something wasn't right. I went into the bedroom, and all the closet doors were open, and her clothes were gone. A wave of emotions came over me. I didn't know what to do. I went to the kitchen to grab a beer and saw the note on the kitchen table. I sat down, read the letter which said she had had enough and was moving out. She said not to contact her, that she had made up her mind and nothing would change it. I proceeded to pour myself a drink and then a few more to make the hurt go away, but instead became very childish and very depressed as well. Later that afternoon, drunk and not in my right mind, I locked all the doors, took as many hydrocodone as I had left, downed them with scotch, laid down, and waited to die. However, God was not willing to take me yet. He had other plans for me. Anyway, for some unknown reason, my son Randy came over to see me. No reason, he told me later, he just felt like coming over. He knew something was wrong when he saw all the doors were locked and all the shades were drawn. So he broke a window, saw me, and quickly called 911. Before I did this, however, I wrote 3 letters to 2 different people, stating that I was sorry for what I was about to do. I'd like to read those letters now, which are very difficult to say. I did this only to show you how insidious addiction can be. To my 2 boys, I love you both, each for different reasons. I'm sorry that I had to do this, but I'm unhappy. I don't like me, and I don't like my life, and without Karen, there is no reason to go on. Please use my legacy, whatever you take from it, to build on your own, and remember that I love you both. Second letter. Dear Karen, I'm sorry that I took the easy way out, but you have already experienced one of those with your mom. Please don't blame yourself, as I have been unhappy with me for quite a while, and if it wasn't for you, I might have done this before now. I love you more than life itself, which I guess explains what I have done. My life was you and you alone. But I guess the liquor was more to ease my pain than to quit and say I don't like myself. I lived a good life, and the years with you were good, sometimes great, but I don't want to continue on alone. Hopefully someone else will find me before you, so you won't have to bear the same burden as you did with your mom. All my love, Doug. P.S. If you look in the top right-hand desk drawer in the office, you will find 4 business card holders, and the last one will be $2,000 to cover my cremation expenses. And this will continue next week when I talk more about addiction, what you can do to help if you are an addict, and also what you can do if someone else is an addict. Thank you for listening.